Hello and welcome to this session. In this session, we will be talking through the work that we did for the OHCHR, or the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, or it's commonly known as UN Human Rights. They are a human rights entity of the United Nations, wherein they work specifically on areas of human rights interests. They assist governments through their field presence in ensuring conflicts are managed on the human rights front. They provide a lot of information and knowledge to people on this aspect. And they also provide a human rights perspective to various other UN programs as well. As part of this project that we worked upon, we will be talking through how we built a solid taxonomy structure to ensure that the users are able to find content from a very content-heavy website, like the proverbial needle in a haystack. We will also touch base upon various aspects of migration that we did for the site from SharePoint to Drupal 8, and also talk through how we provided an optimal user experience on the content editor front as well. Hello, I am Sujata. I work as a business analyst at Accelerate. I worked on the implementation side of this project, wherein we worked towards building what we set out to build in the first place, and also briefly worked in the migration aspects as well, and the user experience for internal users.
Oh, Michelle, I can't hear you.
You're on mute.
There we go. Hi. I'm Michelle Ann Jenkins. I'm a taxonomy consultant with Dovecot Studio based in Montreal, Quebec. My focus for this project was the taxonomy development and providing input into how it could be leveraged for user experience and information architecture. I also oversaw the retagging of content as part of the migration process.
Hi, I'm Lee Crawford, Senior User Experience Designer at Blue State in Brooklyn, New York. For this project, I focused on feature definition and the creation and testing of wireframes and prototypes. And I had an ongoing role consulting on visual design. I also collaborated cross-functionally with my co-presenters on taxonomy work. So I think we're going to turn off our video now. And diving in, as an overview, today we're going to share some background about the scale and complexity of the challenge, how a holistic taxonomy approach helped us address it, and the process followed by key lessons that we've learned that you could also apply in a similar context. And we'll have some time for questions. Please use the Q&A tab to send us your questions and we'll address them at the end. Let's start with an overview of the challenge that this project presented. OHCHR's site serves a variety of audiences, ranging from novices like high school students looking to learn more about human rights, to audiences with more specific questions, like those including academics, government officials, refugees, and migrants, to human rights lawyers, the power users searching across the site for the content that they need to carry out their important work. When OHCHR came to us, the site had last been updated in 2013 when it was migrated to SharePoint. The audiences that I just described encountered pages packed with manually edited content and links without visual hierarchy to guide them. Here you get a taste of the old homepage. The heavy information load and lack of hierarchy are good indicators of some of the challenges that come with speaking to so many different audiences about a large number of topics and subtopics that can quickly touch on areas necessitating some technical expertise. Another complicating part of the challenge arose from the heavy geolocation and linguistic needs. OHCHR publishes its materials in 6 official languages and provides documents in over 500 languages where available. Content can relate to multiple geolocations across almost 200 countries and territories. Here you see a taste of content related to the country Colombia, all of which was added to the old country page manually, creating a frustrating user experience and huge administrative burdens.
OHCHR wanted a new site that would address all of its many challenges. But today we're going to focus here on the particular challenges around findability and discoverability, particularly on a site with a large volume of content and diverse audiences. So findability is the ease with which users can find the information they need. Low findability is not only frustrating for users, but can even undermine the credibility of the organization creating the content. Poor information organization can make users question the information itself. Findability is also critical for internal content operations. An organization that produces content from many different publication streams needs a way to quickly find content across the site. This allows them to keep track of what they have written and avoid duplication of effort. Discoverability, on the other hand, is what helps users understand the breadth and depth of work of the organization and perhaps reveal resources they didn't even know they needed. Good discoverability helps keep users engaged and does a better job communicating the organization's overall work. Solving for both of these was critical for this project. There's just so much information to shift through, and not all users have the time or background to fully understand the complexities of the organizational structure and process. So this project came with a number of challenges. First of all, as we've mentioned, the sheer volume of content, almost 20,000 HTML pages and 30,000 more documents, including PDFs, spreadsheets, infographics, and media assets. There was no single audit of all the content either, so it was a challenge just to get a handle on what existed. OHCHR has complex internal workings based on legal mechanisms, organizational workflows, all of which produce many different kinds of content at different stages of the process. Like many large organizations, OHCHR can be very siloed, so many business units have little or no visibility into other areas of work. This leads to content that has very distributed ownership. Existing vocabularies had grown organically over time. We'll look at some examples later in the presentation, but basically each platform or content collection was developing its own solutions in isolation, different labels, levels of granularity, and structures. The current architecture required extensive manual effort to maintain, adding and updating links, building pages, etc., and just keeping up with it just wasn't keeping up with the ever-increasing amount of content. They needed something that could scale and grow dynamically with their evolving needs. User feedback and research had shown issues with the overall user experience, especially that crucial findability metric, but also deeper concerns around the site's credibility and ability to engage with audiences. Our solution was a holistic taxonomy approach. We needed to use a holistic approach to connect taxonomy, user experience, technology, and content migration work streams over the life of the project. We did this by maximizing collaboration, involving our different disciplines throughout an iterative cycle. We actually went around this circle a few times. Due to the size and complexity of the existing site, there was a lot of analysis and requirements gathering to get started. Again, this ended up being iterative as other phases made decisions that then required additional analysis and requirement gathering to support, for example, additional functionality or refinement of the user experience. All that analysis fed into the initial taxonomy development effort, which actually began even before the UX or web development teams were brought in. We needed to understand the breadth and depth of concepts, users' terminology and mental models, both internal audiences and the diversity of external ones, in order to select the right labels, gather synonyms, and build relationships. Once we had validated the initial terms and structures with the core OHCHR team, we then added definitions and guidelines for how and when to use the terms. All that taxonomy work provided the hooks the UX team needed to design the overall information architecture, page templates, and the dynamic content experiences, such as filter and sort tools for large content collections. In some cases, they found the need for additional taxonomy terms or relationships. In other cases, the taxonomy itself suggested new ways of connecting content, for example, between a committee and the subject or geolocation they were focused on. The development planning took the taxonomy and user experience design and then had the task of making everything actually work. Each content type needed to be defined to determine which taxonomies were available where, as well as large amount of additional administrative metadata and the actual structured content to capture the complexity of OHCHR's reports, calls for inputs, events, and other content types. Finally, the interactive elements needed to be hooked up to all that metadata. And again, at each of these points, we would find the need to do additional analysis, refine the taxonomy, and update the UX design. Once all the plumbing was in place, there was a lot of work to actually build out the site structures. We had to assemble the content types and views, put the pages together, and at the same time, there was retagging and preparing content for migration. So now we'll talk in more detail about the work went on in each work stream, starting with taxonomy development. The first step after initial discovery is drafting a taxonomy framework. This guides the decision-making during development, and then post-launch supports consistency during ongoing maintenance. This document contains the overall taxonomy strategy, the approach, the style guide, and specifications for each vocabulary that is needed. Oftentimes, a taxonomy starts out with a clear, well-thought-out approach, but over time, you get different stakeholders putting in what they want without regard to an overall semantic structure, or even just using little differences in capitalization, term form, or spelling. All that can lead to a messy-looking taxonomy that reduces the credibility of the whole site and eventually an unusable taxonomy. These specifications cover a clear definition of what the vocabulary should include. For example, if you say you have subjects, how do you define what is and is not a subject? The use cases for functionality it needs to support in the CMS, what structure it needs. Is it flat? Is it hierarchical? How deep and granular do you expect it to be? The sources of subject matter experts for input, and key stakeholders for validation, and more. Once we had our framework, we could go looking for concepts. We needed to agree on one label for one concept. There might be many ways to say the same thing or many closely adjacent terms that could be considered synonyms in this specific context. You had to agree on what it meant and agree on how and when it is used, in which content types and in what context. In most cases, an organization will already have existing vocabularies or other organizational systems in place. It might be navigation or folder structures or databases. Different vocabularies that have developed independently are going to have a lot of differences in label, scope, and approach. So even a vocabulary such as countries, which seems like it should be easy and obvious, will have different definitions of what constitutes a country, what form of label to use, and how to deal with things like historic places. All of this had to be reconciled, which required iterative meetings with stakeholders and system owners. One of the most powerful features of taxonomy is the hierarchy. Parent-child relationships mean that tagging a piece of content doesn't just add the single concept as metadata, it hooks the content up with a whole structure of meaning. It's critical when developing taxonomic structures to keep the relationships as semantic as possible. You don't want to be making decisions based on display level things like navigation or an organizational chart. Child terms need to be direct, logical subcategories of the parent. We'll see later in the process where we were able to add a display layer on top of the taxonomy to separate the user experience and editorial needs from this semantic plumbing. Beyond the parent-child relationship, you can also make connections between terms in the same hierarchy or between different vocabularies. These can be used to surface related content, provide links between different content collections, or make suggestions to users about other terms they might want to look at. One of my favorite things about Drupal is the out-of-the-box ability to support multiple named relationships. This means you can be very precise about what a relationship means, whether it's a general related subject or a more specific relationship between a committee and their work. These relationships, as we will see, then become available for powerful business logic behind the scenes of views and other functionality. Once the taxonomy is fully developed, it is ready to be imported into Drupal. Now, we do most of the initial work in a shared spreadsheet. We continue to make refinements within Drupal once it's imported, but I have found that it's easier for a wide range of stakeholders to have access to and make comments in a spreadsheet to get started. This also means you can start working on the taxonomy well ahead of the implementation phase, so even before Drupal is set up for users. Starting early in the process is key because arriving at a final validated taxonomy always takes much more time than people expect. Once the site is launched, governance of the taxonomy will be an ongoing process. Many things can trigger the need for taxonomy changes, including new areas of work, newly identified content types, or site functionality. Additionally, user research and analytics may suggest new or better labels for concepts or additional relationships. The content taggers themselves often have many suggestions as they encounter new topics in the content. In each of these cases, a governance plan lays out who needs to be involved depending on the type and magnitude of the change. Strong, well-documented governance is key to the long-term success of any taxonomy.
So how did this taxonomy work impact the user experience design? To appreciate this, it's helpful to think more broadly about large organization websites, all of which are supported by data or content. Large-scale organizations, whether hospitals, banks, manufacturers, service companies, stores, on and on, all rely on data to reach and serve their users. Taxonomy enables them to deliver all that data and content to users logically and efficiently. So we encourage you to think of the taxonomy as sitting at the nexus, joining content with end users and CMS admin users. To get these flows moving, we connect the content to the taxonomy and the taxonomy to the users. What does that look like? To start, we use the content to create the initial taxonomy. This helps us adapt the names or labels of the taxonomy concepts to the language and expectations of the users. In other words, it helps us select terms that will be related to the user's understanding. So for those of you approaching the early stage of a project requiring intensive taxonomy work, expect the creation of vocabulary and structure to involve deeper view and analysis of existing content and organizing schemes, and discovery conversations with users and subject matter experts. For OHCHR, this meant balancing the official language with what is actually used by content creators and end users. For example, very few people refer to Grand Duchy of Luxembourg or Republic of the Union of Myanmar, or expect Venezuela to start with a B because it's listed as the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This was made even more challenging by the frequent and inconsistent use of acronyms and abbreviations, some of which are originally in another language. What does MINUJUSTH stand for? How is BINUH the abbreviation for United Nations Integration Office in Haiti? Once we have the foundation of an initial taxonomy to work with, we start the process of making it evident to users in the designs. This happens through use of the language and terminology, as well as functionality in the form of key touch points. For this project, when UX started, Michelle's taxonomy work was far along, but not yet final. Some of our early design work didn't take that sufficiently into account. For example, we worked on content listings well before we designed the faceted search results feature. In hindsight, it would have been better to pair those and have them both occur later in the design sprints to have a more complete understanding of the scale of the filtering terms coming out of the closer to done taxonomy. For those planning sprints for UX design on a similar project, there are real advantages to thinking about how much taxonomy will bear on the features being designed. Those heavily affected are better scheduled later. That kind of analysis is made a bit easier when you keep in mind the key taxonomy UI touch points that I mentioned. They fall into 4 buckets that simply illustrate some helpful prompts for design decisions that bring taxonomy to life for users. Visual touch points present taxonomy terms using things like eyebrows, labels, icons, and color coding, any of which could be included on a card like this, as well as in many other places in the user interface. Content discovery, for example, through dynamic population of related content components, is powered by taxonomies. And even when that connection is not explicit to the user, it similarly works as a touch point connecting direct user experience with taxonomy. Content filtering, for example, through faceted search and filters or on-page tags, is one of the most significant applications of taxonomy that users can readily experience and appreciate. And sometimes the navigation design might present taxonomy directly, as when primary or secondary navigation categories are themselves taxonomy terms. No single website is likely to use all of the available touchpoints. In design, we choose those that fit the site needs and content best. For OHCHR, we incorporated these touchpoints in a number of ways that make the taxonomies come alive and reward end users and CMS admin users alike. Let's return to that example of the country page for Colombia with too many manually curated and undifferentiated links. Redesigned with taxonomies in place, the new country page clarifies the content, which is populated dynamically. The page is tagged with geolocation, and all of the components surface items that have the same geolocation with variations depending on the content types, content categories, and entities. So now content finds its appropriate place based on tags and categorization as either news, statements, stories, reports, special procedures, and treaty bodies. The topics pages presented a similar challenge. Editorially burdensome pages filled with undifferentiated content and overwhelming links populated 150 pages covering more than 70 topics. The Taxonomy project presented the opportunity to redefine and fine-tune the list of topics, and then the topic page was redesigned. Here we're looking at the new topic page used in this case for freedom of expression. It's tagged with all the subjects that are related to freedom of expression topic. Then matching content populates the components for different content categories. Here you can see that those include calls for input, reports, and stories, along with others, including multiple entities. And now the journey from a story like the one magnified here can leverage multiple taxonomy touch points to enable the user to discover and find content according to clear terms. So at the end of the story, the user might click on the tag for hate speech, which will take her to a listing page pre-filtered for matching content. This way, in addition to the related content on the story page itself, the user can now access content related to many more related subjects. And for the CMS admin user, getting this to happen is much easier, as Sujatha will explain further.
While we may work on building a top-notch user experience for end users, there should be adequate consideration for CMS admin users and their experiences in using the site, which will form a key element in ensuring the site is well maintained. When we started out this project, the existing editorial process was a little cumbersome, and because the subject matter experts were located worldwide, so content curation, reviewing the content, and then publishing it was a tedious task. It required a lot of back and forth via emails, and it also required management oversight to see whether content is published and at the right time. And beyond this, there was also the issue of having standardized tags on the SharePoint site as well. In order to address all of these issues, we decided to build a content editorial experience that was built on top of the taxonomy structure. So in order to get the benefits of having a detailed taxonomy study and a solid structure there, it's vital that the CMS admins are able to easily manage it. If the terms are inconsistently applied, then the benefits of having a good taxonomy gets diminished over time. The interface for applying these values should be clear and easy to use. There should be easy lookups and a clear hierarchical organization of content, so that the content editors are easily able to pick out terms and tag them. Beyond this, we also organized the users into various user groups based on their subject matter expertise and the location they were built into. This meant that the right people had access to the right set of content to create, edit, review, and publish. We also built in associated email alerts so that people are alerted on time about the actions that they need to perform. There was appropriate access control set in place. We also defined multi-level reviews so that sensitive content is reviewed by appropriate folks before it gets published. There was also options to access an earlier revision and revert to an older version if need be. And auto archival was built into place. We also had user role specific dashboards to intimate users of what needs to be done next. And there were also options for taggers to edit content with ease. Once we had all of this in place, from a solution perspective, Drupal makes it easier for content editors and admin users to manage complex taxonomy systems and thereby the content with ease. We built various views and facets on top of this evolving taxonomy structure. What you see on screen here is a page about the human rights of migrants specifically. This page contains latest information on various aspects of human rights, specifically about migrants. There are other pages that are similar that concern human rights of women, human rights of people with disabilities, and so on. On the content editor part, they just need to ensure that the right entity is being picked here, and appropriate subject and its subcategories are being tagged. So this means the content editor has to pick out human rights and migrants related subjects that are already predefined, and the robust structure of the taxonomy here ensures that all relevant content across content types, they get pulled into this human rights of migrants page. Up next, we'll see a page about a country and how we handled the content creation for that page. When you look at this page, it's about the country Colombia, which showcases all latest human rights related stories, news, events that are relevant to that particular geolocation. The content editor here needed to showcase content which are a combination of the geolocation and the content type here. This means something like latest 4 news articles of Colombia and so on. So they just needed to pull out the content this way, and dynamic views were generated based on the taxonomy term combinations that were used. While we talk about building a new site and all, we also need to take into account how we handle legacy content. This was where we had to think through the migration aspect as such. The migration involved extensive inputs from the clients and a lot of brainstorming and discussion on categorizing of the existing thousands of pages into various page models. This meant we spoke through every single type of page and split them into various content types. What components should the content go into? Which layout would these pages follow in Drupal? What would be the URL schema here? How would translations be handled, and so on. We also had to make accurate source destination mapping at the field level to ensure that none of the content is missed. Also, migration was not a single one-off task that was being done. We had to do it in multiple cycles. So we prioritized migration into content chunks based on their content type. For instance, instruments were migrated in one go, or based on a time period, 5 years of news archives were migrated, and so on. Migration was a cyclical activity that was ongoing, and it evolved along with the ongoing work on taxonomy and any design changes as well. So currently we are at this stage of the project where we are gearing up for launch. We are doing some final migration rounds here. We are ensuring that the content is cleaned up, and some content retagging work is also in progress currently.
Great. So after the site launch, the work isn't over. We have ongoing analysis, internal feedback, and user research will continue to reveal new requirements that trigger additional taxonomy refinement and enhancement, adding new concepts, adjusting labels, building relationships, as well as the dependent UX and development efforts. The content migration and retagging effort is also going to continue to focus on older, lower priority collections that we didn't get to before launch. While this process presented a number of challenges, we're confident that we've achieved our goal of giving OHCHR a usable, scalable, manageable site. We learned a lot during this project, and we'd like to share a couple of the key takeaways. First off, you can't just hand things off in a traditional waterfall approach. There needs to be transparency, communication, and a lot of sharing back and forth between the different work streams.
And it's best to involve implementation teams early in conjunction with taxonomy planning and UX design. If all the teams connect early, they can better align with each other about what kind of information they need to plan and help guide the timing of activities that will take best advantage of the constantly evolving taxonomy work.
We also learned that migration cannot be a simple one-off effort. It requires adequate time invested in terms of properly auditing the existing site and careful categorization of content before we can even move to the migration part. While programmatic efforts are required, it is also imperative that there will be some amount of manual effort involved in doing migration for a site of this scale. We have some resources for anyone who would want to dive deeper into this topic, and we'd be happy to follow up or hear from you afterwards as well.
So now, after having shared our experience, we'd be happy to answer any questions you have for us in the remaining, I think, maybe 10 minutes. If And in the meantime, here's the information you can use to contact us with any particular questions. Let's see.
So there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. I'm just going to grab the one on the top because I think that's more for me. It says, do you have any recommendations for documenting the taxonomy as it goes through the taxonomy development, UX, and Drupal development process? So as I said, we really just worked within a spreadsheet, but I have to say that you can't just throw that over the fence. We did quite a bit of presenting back and forth. So as we started the project, I basically presented the taxonomy development so that everyone understood where we were coming from, where we were, shared the framework as well, so that overarching idea of how it should work. But developing your own spreadsheet template is really the best way to document it. We had quite a lot of metadata for each term. So looking at countries, we have the ISO code, the UN name, whether it's an officially recognized UN country, things like that had to be built out in that. So really just coming up with your own spreadsheet template, I think, is the best way. And then we took a point where we froze the spreadsheet, imported it into Drupal, and after that, the ongoing work went on in Drupal. I do suggest that you create a field in Drupal that's for development or history notes so that you can capture why decisions were made, because otherwise you find yourself going back in a circle and changing things and being like, why did we do that before? So my suggestions. We did drop a link to the PDF of the slide in chat. So that should be available now. Let's see, what else do we have? How do you deal with taxonomy in the 6 languages? So I can just say that I did the development in English. So I really just focused on the concepts and the English labels. And then there was an effort to translate everything into the different languages. So that's where it kind of ended in terms of my interaction with it. I don't know if anyone else has more to speak to how I know Drupal manages translations for the taxonomy terms, but we did the tagging in English and the development in English. Presentation shared. Oops. Any other questions? Great. All right. Do we just give people back a little of their time?
Yeah, certainly we invite you to be in touch if other questions come to mind, especially while perusing the PDF.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.